What if your mind could sense death before it actually happens? This isn't science fiction. This is a question that fascinated one of the most brilliant minds in psychology, Carl Jung. A man who spent his life exploring the hidden corners of our unconscious. Jung studied not only dreams and symbols, but also the strange, often unexplainable experiences people reported in the final days of their lives. Jung believed that before death, our mind and soul go through 5 profound and mysterious changes, moments where the veil between life and whatever comes next begins to thin. These aren't just abstract theories. They've been witnessed in hospital rooms, in quiet homes, and in the stories of those who've been close to the edge and returned. And here's the thing. Understanding these mysteries isn't only about preparing for death. It's about living differently while you still can. Because each one of these signs is a reminder that our time is precious and fleeting. So stay with me until the very end, because mystery number 5 might completely change how you see your own life starting today. Let's start with something many of you may have experienced yourself or heard from someone close to you. In the days or weeks before death, some people begin to have dreams so vivid, so filled with meaning, that they feel more like messages than random thoughts. Carl Jung had a name for these archetypes of departure. They are recurring symbolic images that seem to appear when the soul is preparing to leave this world. You might dream of stepping onto a boat that slowly drifts into the horizon. You might see a doorway opening at the far end of a hallway. Or maybe it's a bridge long, mysterious, and disappearing into the mist. To Jung, these were not coincidences. He believed the unconscious mind speaks in the language of symbols, and as death approaches, it begins to prepare us for what he called the transition into another state of being. One of his patients, an elderly woman in relatively stable condition, told him of a recurring dream she'd been having. In it, she was walking down a long, dimly lit corridor. At the end, a warm golden light glowed like the sun at dawn. She could never see exactly what was beyond it, but she said she felt an overwhelming sense of peace every time she woke up. Just 1 week later, she passed away quietly in her sleep. Jung didn't interpret this as something eerie or morbid. Instead, he saw it as the mind's way of softening the passage, making the concept of crossing over less frightening, even comforting. It's as if the psyche, knowing the conscious mind might resist, gently sends these images to help us accept the journey ahead. And here's where it gets personal. Have you ever had a dream that felt like more than just a dream? One that left you with a lingering emotion you couldn't quite explain? Imagine if that dream wasn't about the past, but about preparing you for what's to come. Jung's perspective turns what could be seen as just a strange dream into something deeply human. A reminder that even in our final chapter, the mind doesn't abandon us. It guides us in the only language it knows, through symbols that speak directly to the soul. There's something deeply mysterious and incredibly moving that happens to some people in the days before they die. It's not fear. It's not sadness. In fact, it's the opposite. They find peace. A peace so deep, so unshakable, that it almost feels out of place. Imagine someone who's been fighting illness for months or years. Someone who's been anxious, restless, or even terrified about what's coming. And then suddenly they stop struggling. They relax. They smile. They seem lighter. Carl Jung had a fascinating explanation for this. He believed that in those final days, the ego, that part of us that's always striving, defending, worrying, begins to dissolve. It merges with what he called the self, the wholeness of our being, the eternal part of us that isn't bound by time fear or the limits of our physical body. When the ego and the self unite, the battles we fought our entire lives come to an end. The mind stops chasing. The heart stops clinging. And in that stillness, peace flows in like warm sunlight after a long winter. One of the most unforgettable stories I've read was about a man in his late 60s. He'd been living with late-stage cancer for years. In the months before his death, he was often restless, checking his watch, pacing in the hospital room, asking the doctors endless questions. The fear of the unknown weighed heavily on him. But something changed 3 days before he passed. His daughter described walking into the room and finding her father sitting by the window, just watching the trees sway in the wind. He wasn't hooked up to his phone. He wasn't asking what time it was. He just smiled and said, "I've been waiting for this quiet my whole life." From that moment until his last breath, he never lost that calm. The family even joked that he was more peaceful than he'd ever been in his entire life. Jung would say that in those last days, the man's ego had surrendered, allowing his deeper self to step forward. And when that happens, fear has no ground to stand on. It makes me wonder, how many of us spend decades chasing peace in all the wrong places, through success, through control, through the next big goal, when the deepest peace might not come from adding more, but from letting go? And here's the challenging question. Do we really have to wait until the end to feel this kind of serenity? Jung's insight here is powerful, not just for the dying, but for the living. If the merging of ego and self can bring peace in our final days, maybe we can start that process long before death comes knocking. How by noticing where our ego is running the show, where it's making us anxious, competitive, or afraid, and slowly loosening its grip. By practicing moments of stillness now, whether through meditation, quiet walks, or simply allowing ourselves to sit without reaching for a distraction. The truth is, peace doesn't have to be a last-minute gift. It can be a lifelong practice. If you've ever seen this phenomenon in a loved one, you know how profound it is. You know how it can transform the atmosphere in a room. Conversations become softer. Small annoyances vanish. Every touch, every glance feels more meaningful. In those final days, peace doesn't just change the person who's dying. It changes everyone around them. It's as if their calm is contagious, reminding us all that maybe, just maybe, there's nothing to fear after all. And that's the beauty of this second mystery. It's a whisper from the soul that says, it's okay. You can rest now. Have you ever had a feeling so strong, so unshakable, that you just knew something was about to happen? Now imagine that feeling, but instead of a random event, it's about your own final day on Earth. Carl Jung found this phenomenon both fascinating and deeply human. In his work, he encountered cases where people seemed to know with startling precision when their time was near. This wasn't about vague predictions or superstition. He called it unconscious alignment. What did he mean by that? According to Jung, there are moments when the mind, body, and spirit fall into complete sync with the natural rhythm of life and death. It's as if, on a level deeper than conscious thought, we are reading signals from within, signals we normally ignore or drown out in the noise of everyday life. One doctor shared a story that perfectly captures this mystery. He had a patient, an elderly woman, who was still relatively stable, alert, and even planning for the upcoming holidays. One day she told him, "Doctor, I'm going to leave this world next Thursday." He smiled politely, thinking it was just a reflection of her age or a poetic way of speaking. But then she began making arrangements, calling relatives, writing letters, even organizing a small farewell lunch for her closest friends and family. And here's the part that sends chills down your spine. On Thursday afternoon, after the last guest left, she laid down for a nap and never woke up. Jung would say that in her final days, her unconscious mind had fully registered what the conscious mind often resists, the approach of death. And rather than fear it, she embraced it. She said her goodbyes, and she left exactly when she felt ready. Now, whether you see this as spiritual foresight, a heightened awareness of the body's decline, or something far more mysterious, and the effect is the same. It transforms the way a person and those around them face the end. Think about it. How much of our lives do we spend pretending we have unlimited time? We delay conversations, we postpone dreams, we act as if tomorrow is guaranteed. But what if you knew the exact day you would leave? Would you finally say the things you've been holding back? Would you forgive? Would you chase that one dream you've been putting off for years? This is where Jung's insight becomes more than theory. It becomes a mirror. He challenges us to ask, why wait for the unconscious to align at the very end? Why not listen for its guidance now? We may not all have that exact knowing before our final moment. But we do have moments when intuition whispers truths our logic can't explain. Maybe it's a gut feeling telling you to call a loved one. Maybe it's a sudden urge to change your life's direction. Jung believed those whispers come from the same source, the deeper self, that sees beyond the timeline our ego clings to. And in rare cases, that self reveals the ultimate truth, the moment we're going to cross over. So here's the challenge: don't wait for life to give you a countdown. Live with the urgency and clarity as if you already knew the clock was ticking. Because the truth is, it always is. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real gift of this third mystery. It's not about predicting the exact moment of your death. It's about learning to live so fully that when that moment comes, you'll be ready to meet it without regret. There's a moment, one that many families find impossible to explain, that often happens in the final days of life. The dying person will open their eyes, look toward an empty corner of the room, and smile. Sometimes they'll speak as if someone is standing there. Sometimes they'll simply whisper a name. And when the family leans in to ask, "Who do you see?" the answer sends shivers down their spine. They're seeing someone who's already gone. Carl Jung saw this phenomenon again and again, and to him, it wasn't random. He believed these encounters were symbols, or perhaps even experiences of a deeper connection he called the collective unconscious. To Jung, the collective unconscious is like a vast, invisible ocean of memory and meaning shared by all human beings. In those final moments of life, the boundary between the conscious mind and this shared realm grows thin. And in that openness, we might reconnect with those who've already crossed over. One of the most touching accounts I've heard comes from a hospice nurse with over 20 years of experience. She cared for an elderly woman whose husband had died more than 3 decades earlier. In her last week, the woman began talking to someone in the room when no one else was there. At first, the nurse assumed she was hallucinating due to medication. But then one evening, the woman's eyes grew bright and she whispered, "He's here. He's come to take me home." Moments later, she closed her eyes and passed peacefully. For the nurse, it was one of hundreds of similar moments she had witnessed, but it never stopped feeling profound. Now, whether you believe these visions are purely psychological, a comforting projection of the mind, or genuinely spiritual encounters, one thing is certain: they bring peace. They take away fear. They reassure the dying that they are not stepping into darkness, but into a reunion. Jung believed that even if these figures appear only in the mind, their impact is real. They serve a purpose to help us let go. Have you ever been with someone in their final days and heard them speak to a loved one who'd already passed? How did it make you feel? Did it comfort you? Or did it leave you wondering what really happens when we cross that threshold? Here's the thing: Jung's perspective offers a bridge between the psychological and the spiritual. On one hand, these encounters could be the mind's way of easing the transition, drawing on deep memories and archetypes that represent love, safety, and belonging. On the other, if the collective unconscious truly connects all souls, then maybe those visions are exactly what they seem to be, loved ones returning to guide us home. Either way, this fourth mystery reminds us of something beautiful, that love doesn't end with death. It stays, it reaches across whatever lies between this world and the next. And in those final moments, it might just be the hand that takes ours and leads us forward. There's a moment that many people describe in their final hours, a moment when time seems to fold in on itself. Suddenly, they're not in the hospital room or at home in their bed. They're everywhere they've ever been. Memories rush forward like a film playing in fast motion, the laughter of childhood, the first kiss, the mistakes, the victories, the tears, the sunsets. It's not just a highlight reel, it's everything. Carl Jung called this the life review, and to him, it was more than nostalgia. He believed it was the soul's way of gathering every experience, every joy, every wound, every lesson, into one complete, integrated whole before crossing the threshold. Imagine it like packing for a great journey. You're not just grabbing random things, you're collecting the pieces that define who you are. You're making sense of your story so you can carry it with you into whatever comes next. A hospice worker once shared a story of a man in his 80s who had been unconscious for most of his last day. But then suddenly, he opened his eyes and began speaking not to anyone in the room, but as if to the air. I see my mother making breakfast. I'm holding my son for the first time. I'm standing at the edge of the lake where I used to fish with my father. I'm everywhere. His breathing slowed, and his last words were, "It all makes sense now." For Jung, this is what the life review offers, not just the chance to relive, but to understand, to see the patterns, the connections, the meaning that might have been invisible while we were busy living it. It's beautiful, but it's also a challenge. Because if we know that one day we will see our lives laid out before us, the question becomes, what will we see? Will we see a life full of risks, taken, love shared, and moments embraced, or will we see years spent waiting? Waiting for the right time, waiting for permission, waiting for life to start. Jung believed the life review wasn't there to judge us, it was there to free us. In integrating every moment, the soul reaches a state of wholeness, ready for its next chapter. But here's the truth, we don't have to wait until our last breath to start that process. We can begin integrating our life now by reflecting on our choices, mending broken relationships, and living in a way that would make us proud in that final review. So ask yourself, if your life played back for you tonight, would you smile? Would you feel peace? Or would you wish you had done things differently, because one day that moment will come? And when it does, you'll want to see a story worth watching, a story that, even at the very end, makes you say, "It all makes sense now." Carl Jung never saw death as an ending. To him, it was a threshold, a doorway into another stage of the soul's development. Just as birth brings us into this world, death, in his view, carries us into another dimension of growth. And maybe that's the most important thing to take away from everything we've explored today. Death is not a cliff we fall from. It's a bridge we cross. So let me ask you, if you knew you had only 24 hours left, what would you do differently today? Would you make that phone call you've been avoiding? Forgive someone you've held a grudge against. Tell the people you love exactly how much they mean to you. Or maybe finally give yourself permission to live in a way that feels true without apology. It's a powerful question, and one we don't ask ourselves often enough. Because the truth is, none of us know how much time we have left. And yet, we all have the choice to live like our time is precious. Because it is. If this topic spoke to you, You'll want to join me for our next episode, where we'll explore the dreams that may predict death and the surprising meanings Carl Jung found hidden in them. These aren't just eerie coincidences. They might be the mind's way of preparing us for what's ahead. If you found value in this conversation, hit the like button. It helps more people discover these stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this series, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed any of these signs in someone you know? Or maybe you've experienced something similar yourself. I'd love to hear your story, because the more we talk about this, the more we understand not just death, but life itself.